The wagon rattled into the dusty settlement of Bitter Springs, Wyoming Territory, carrying 15-year-old Penny Holloway and a marriage certificate she hadn't asked for, binding her to a man 3 times her age who smelled of whiskey and decay. She sat rigid on the wooden bench beside Samuel Cross, her new husband, watching the weathered buildings of the frontier town emerge through the dust. Her father had signed the papers 2 days ago in Cheyenne, taking $50 and a bottle of whiskey in exchange for his youngest daughter. Her mother had cried quietly in the corner, but she hadn't stopped it. Nobody had stopped it. Samuel Cross was 52 years old with yellowed teeth and hands that trembled when they weren't wrapped around a bottle. He owned a small trading post on the edge of town and a cabin that leaned slightly to the left, as if trying to escape its own foundation. Penny had learned these facts during the silent journey from Cheyenne, gleaning information from the few words he muttered between swigs from his flask. The year was 1873, and this was how things were done when families needed money and men needed labor. Marriage was often just another transaction, no different from buying cattle or trading furs. Penny understood this with the cold clarity of someone who had grown up watching her older sisters married off one by one, though at least they had been 16 and 17, and their husbands had been younger men with working ranches. As the wagon pulled up to the trading post, a young cowboy emerged from the building next door, a modest stable with a hand-painted sign that read Yates Horse Breaking and Training. He couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that needed cutting and blue eyes that caught the late afternoon sun. He glanced at the wagon, then at Samuel, and finally at Penny. Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to name, before he looked away and returned to his work. Zane Yates had seen many things in his years on the frontier, but the sight of that girl sitting beside Samuel Cross made his stomach turn. She was a child, thin and pale, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid and green eyes that held no light. He knew what this was. He had seen it before. A purchased bride, probably from a desperate family, sold to a man who wanted a servant more than a wife. He drove the pitchfork into the hay bale harder than necessary, anger coursing through his veins. But what could he do? The law was on Samuel's side. Marriage was marriage, even when it was wrong. That first night, Penny learned the layout of her new prison. The cabin had 2 rooms, a main living area with a cast iron stove, a rough wooden table and 2 chairs, and a smaller bedroom with a sagging bed and a trunk for clothes. Samuel showed her where he kept his supplies, told her what he expected for meals, and informed her that she would be working in the trading post every day except Sunday. "You will earn your keep," he said, his breath sour with alcohol. "I paid good money for you." Penny nodded, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes on the floor. She had already decided that she would survive this. She didn't know how yet, but she would. That night, Samuel fell into bed drunk and unconscious. Penny sat in the chair by the cold stove until dawn, too afraid to sleep, too numb to cry. The next morning she learned the routine. Wake before sunrise, start the fire, make coffee and cornmeal mush, wake Samuel, clean the breakfast dishes, walk to the trading post and work until dark. The trading post sold everything from flour and sugar to whiskey and ammunition. Penny stood behind the counter, measuring out goods, taking money and speaking only when spoken to. Zane came in on her 3rd day, needing grain for his horses. He approached the counter and found himself looking at the girl up close for the first time. She was thin, too thin, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there was something in the set of her jaw, a determination that suggested she hadn't broken yet. 20 pounds of oats, he said quietly. She nodded and moved to measure out the grain. Her hands were steady despite their trembling. When she returned with the sack, he paid her, and their fingers brushed briefly. She pulled back as if burned, fear flashing in her eyes. "I am not going to hurt you," Zane said softly. Penny looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Kindness. It was so foreign in this new life that she didn't know what to do with it. 25 cents, she whispered. He paid and left, but the brief interaction stayed with both of them. Weeks passed into months. Penny learned to move through her days like a ghost, completing her tasks with mechanical efficiency while keeping some small part of herself locked away where Samuel couldn't reach it. He drank heavily every night, which was both a blessing and a curse. He mostly left her alone physically, too drunk to do more than pass out, but his words were cruel and his temper unpredictable. Zane watched from a distance, his concern growing each time he saw her. She was getting thinner, her eyes more hollow. He made excuses to visit the trading post more often than necessary, buying supplies he didn't need just to check on her. They never spoke more than a few words, but something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that he saw her and she was not invisible. The first winter was brutal. The wind howled down from the mountains, and snow piled high against the cabin walls. Samuel drank more, his moods darker and more violent. He never struck Penny, but he threw things, shouted, and made her life a constant state of tension. She learned to read his moods, to disappear into herself when necessary, to survive. On a particularly cold January morning, Samuel didn't wake up. Penny stood over the bed, looking at his gray face and still chest, and felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, nothing. She walked to the doctor's house and reported the death in a flat, emotionless voice. Dr. Morrison confirmed what she already knew. Samuel's heart had given out, likely helped along by years of heavy drinking. The funeral was small. A few townspeople came out of obligation rather than affection. Samuel Cross had not been well liked. Penny stood in her thin black dress, borrowed from the doctor's wife, and wondered what would happen to her now. The answer came quickly. Samuel had no family, and his will, such as it was, left everything to his wife. Penny, at 16 years old, found herself the owner of a trading post, a leaning cabin, and a small amount of savings hidden in a coffee tin. The town clerk, a nervous man named Herbert Finch, explained her situation. "You are quite young to be running a business alone. Perhaps you might consider remarrying quickly. I am sure there would be interested parties." Penny looked at him with those green eyes that had learned to hide so much. "I will run the trading post myself." And she did. It wasn't easy. Some customers didn't want to do business with a young widow. Some men saw her as an opportunity, assuming she would be desperate and pliable. But Penny had learned how to survive, and survival included setting boundaries. When Thomas Wardell, a rancher in his 40s, cornered her in the trading post one evening with a proposal that was more demand than request, she pulled out the shotgun Samuel had kept under the counter. "I will run my own business and my own life," she said quietly. "You can leave now." He left, and word spread. The Holloway widow was not to be trifled with. Zane heard the story from several sources, each telling slightly different versions. But the core remained the same. Penny had defended herself and her independence. He felt a surge of pride, though he had no claim to pride in her accomplishments. He was just the neighbor who broke horses and watched from afar, but watching wasn't enough anymore. He started finding legitimate reasons to help. When her roof leaked during a spring storm, he appeared with tar paper and nails. When a delivery of goods arrived too heavy for her to unload alone, he was there to help carry the crates. When 3 drifters caused trouble in the trading post, trying to intimidate her into giving them supplies on credit. He happened to walk in at the right moment, his hand resting casually on his revolver. The drifters left without incident. Penny looked at him after they were gone, really looked at him, seeing past the surface for the first time. "Why do you keep helping me?" Zane met her gaze steadily. "Because somebody should." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She felt something crack inside her chest, a tiny fissure in the walls she had built. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and left, but something had shifted between them. Time moved forward. Penny turned 17, then 18. The trading post prospered under her management. She was fair but firm, honest in her dealings and sharp enough to prevent being cheated. She saved her money carefully, making small improvements to the business and the cabin. She taught herself to read better using newspapers left behind by customers and a Bible given to her by the preacher's wife. She learned to cook more than just basic survival meals. She learned to live instead of just survive. Zane continued his work with horses, building a reputation as one of the best breakers in the territory. His business grew, and he expanded his stable. He was patient with the animals, never cruel, working with them until they trusted him rather than breaking their spirits. People said he had a gift. He figured he just understood what it was like to be afraid and how much patience real trust required. He was 26 now, and folks in town had started asking why he hadn't married. There were several young women who had made their interest clear. Sarah Cunningham, the banker's daughter, had practically proposed to him herself at the 4th of July picnic. But Zane deflected these advances politely. He knew exactly why he hadn't married, though he wouldn't speak it aloud. He was waiting for someone to be ready, and he was a patient man. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late summer of 1877 when everything changed. Penny was arranging canned goods on a shelf when Zane entered the trading post. She turned, and for the first time, she smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Good afternoon, Zane." They had progressed to first names over the years, though always with careful propriety. But hearing her say his name with that smile did something to his heart. "Good afternoon, Penny. I need some coffee beans and sugar." She gathered his order, and they made small talk about the weather and the upcoming harvest. But there was something different in the air between them, a charge that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. "Would you like to stay for coffee?" Penny asked suddenly, surprising herself. "I just made a fresh pot. For myself, I mean. I have a small stove in the back room." Zane studied her face, seeing the nervousness beneath the invitation but also genuine desire for company. His company. "I would like that very much." They sat in the small back room on mismatched chairs, drinking coffee from tin cups. The conversation flowed more easily than expected. Penny asked about his work, and he told her about a particularly stubborn mare he was training. She told him about a traveling salesman who had tried to sell her supposedly magical elixir that was obviously just colored water and grain alcohol. They laughed together, and the sound of her laughter was the most beautiful thing Zane had ever heard. When he left an hour later, they both knew something had begun, though neither spoke it aloud yet. The courting that followed was slow and careful, like training a wild horse. Zane understood that Penny had been hurt, that trust was not something she gave easily. He took his time, proving through consistent action that he was safe, that he saw her as a person rather than property, that he would wait as long as necessary. He started taking his evening meals at the small restaurant next to the trading post, timing his arrival for when she closed up shop. They would walk back to her cabin together in the fading light, talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved the mountains but had never had time to explore them properly. She learned that he had come west from Ohio after his parents died, seeking a fresh start. He learned that she sometimes had nightmares about her year with Samuel. She learned that he wrote poetry in a leather journal he kept hidden in his saddlebag. "You write poetry?" she asked, delighted by this revelation. He looked embarrassed. "It is not very good." "I would like to read it sometime, if you would be willing to share." "Maybe someday," he said, which was as close to a promise of a future together as they had yet ventured. The town watched this courtship with interest. Some approved, seeing it as a sensible match between two hard-working young people. Others whispered about propriety and appropriate mourning periods, though Penny had been widowed for over 2 years now. And some, like old Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, simply smiled knowingly and waited for the inevitable. It was October when Zane first kissed her. They were standing outside her cabin, the autumn air crisp and smelling of wood smoke. He had just finished repairing a broken window shutter, and she had invited him to share the apple pie she had baked that afternoon. As they stood on the small porch, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Penny looked up at him and knew with sudden clarity that she loved this man. The realization didn't frighten her as she had expected it might. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Zane," she said softly. He looked down at her, and whatever he saw in her face made him catch his breath. "Penny, I have been waiting a long time to ask you something." "You have. May I kiss you?" The fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made her love him even more. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her gently, as if she were something precious and fragile. But she wasn't fragile, not anymore. She had been forged in fire and had come through steel. When she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and hope she had been afraid to acknowledge, he understood that she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you for years, but I needed to wait until you were ready, until you could choose me freely." Tears streamed down Penny's face, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too, and I choose you, I choose this." "Then marry me," he said. "Not because you have to, not because you need protection or provision, but because you want to. Marry me because you love me, and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place on a clear November morning in the small church at the center of Bitter Springs. Penny wore a new dress, made of soft blue fabric that brought out her eyes, purchased with her own money from her own work. She walked down the aisle alone, because this time she was giving herself away by her own choice. Zane stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love and devotion that several ladies in the congregation had to dab at their eyes. When Penny reached him, he took her hand gently, and she squeezed his fingers in return. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with appropriate solemnity, but even he couldn't help smiling at the obvious love between these two young people. When he pronounced them husband and wife, and Zane kissed his bride, the small congregation applauded. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The community had come together to provide food and drink. Mrs. Patterson had baked 3 different cakes. The Miller brothers brought their fiddles and played dancing music. For the first time since arriving in Bitter Springs 6 years ago, Penny felt like she truly belonged. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, Zane and Penny walked to the house he had been quietly building on the other side of his stable. He had told her about it a month before, showing her the plans and asking for her input. It was a real house, not a leaning cabin, with 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a sitting room with windows that looked toward the mountains. "Welcome home," he said, lifting her across the threshold. Penny looked around at the space that was now theirs, at the furniture he had carefully chosen, and the curtains that Mrs. Patterson had helped him hang. On the kitchen table sat his leather journal, open to a page filled with handwriting. She walked over and read the poem he had written. She came as a ghost, hollow-eyed and afraid. I saw her and knew I would wait, through seasons of sorrow, through years growing strong, until she could choose her own fate. Now she stands beside me, no longer alone. Her smile like the sun breaking through. She chose me as freely as I have chosen her, and that makes everything new. Penny pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in those simple words. When she turned to Zane, he was watching her with patient love. "You waited for me," she said wonderingly. "All this time you waited." "You were worth waiting for," he replied simply. That night in the house they would share, Zane loved his wife with patience and tenderness, erasing the memories of fear and replacing them with safety and desire. Penny discovered that intimacy could be beautiful when it was a choice made with love. She fell asleep in his arms, truly safe for the first time since childhood. The years that followed were full and rich. Penny continued to run the trading post, but now she had a partner to help with the heavy work. Zane's horse training business continued to grow. Together, they became pillars of the community, known for their fairness, generosity, and obvious devotion to each other. In the spring of 1879, Penny discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of joy and terror. Her own childhood had been marked by poverty and parents who saw their children as burdens. Her brief marriage to Samuel had taught her that family could be a prison. But Zane, seeing her fear, took her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "This child will be born from love," he said firmly. "We will give them everything we didn't have: safety, choice, unconditional love. You are not your parents and I am not Samuel. We are writing our own story." His words calmed the storm inside her. She placed his hand on her still flat belly and said, "Our story." Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him James Zachary Yates, and from the moment he entered the world, he was loved beyond measure. Penny discovered that motherhood suited her. The fierce protectiveness she felt toward James surprised her with its intensity. She would never let him feel unwanted or traded away like property. She would raise him to be strong and kind, like his father. Zane was an attentive father, involved in every aspect of James's care. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor during late-night crying fits, and sang lullabies in a surprisingly pleasant voice. Watching him cradle their son, Penny fell in love with him all over again. As James grew from infant to toddler, the trading post and stable thrived. Bitter Springs was growing, with new families arriving each year. The town needed a proper school, and Penny was instrumental in organizing the effort to build one. She had never received much formal education herself, but she was determined that her children and all the children in town would have opportunities she had been denied. In 1881, their daughter arrived. They named her Rose Elizabeth Yates, and she had auburn hair like her mother and blue eyes like her father. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. The house that had seemed so spacious now rang with the sounds of family. Laughter and crying, running feet and excited chatter, the ordinary chaos of children being children. For Penny, these sounds were medicine for old wounds. This was what a family should be. Not silent fear and tension, but noise and life and love. One evening, when James was 5 and Rose was 3, Penny stood in the doorway watching her family. Zane was on the floor, playing with wooden blocks with both children. James was building an elaborate stable, while Rose was more interested in knocking down whatever her brother built. Instead of getting angry, James just laughed and rebuilt, showing his sister how to stack blocks properly. Zane looked up and caught Penny watching. The look that passed between them contained years of shared history, of healing and growth, of love that had been worth waiting for. "Come join us," he said, holding out his hand. She crossed the room and settled beside them on the floor, and Rose immediately climbed into her lap. James leaned against her shoulder, showing her his creation. "Look, Mama, I made our stable and your trading post and our house." "It is perfect," she said, kissing the top of his head. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Penny and Zane sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge. She was nestled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "You remember the first time you came into the trading post?" she asked. "I remember thinking you looked like you would disappear if someone breathed too hard, like a ghost." "I felt like a ghost," she admitted. "I wasn't really living, just surviving. And now?" She considered the question, thinking about everything that had happened since those dark days. The fear and pain, yes, but also the slow healing. The discovery that she was stronger than she knew. The gift of being loved by a man who respected her enough to wait until she was ready. The joy of children born from choice and love rather than obligation. "Now I am alive," she said simply, "truly alive, and it is beautiful." Zane kissed her temple. "You made it beautiful. You survived what would have broken many people, and you turned that survival into a real life." "I just waited and loved you. Just," she laughed softly. "Zane, your patience and love made everything possible. You gave me time to heal. You let me choose. You waited until I was ready to be loved right. You were always worth waiting for." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the frontier. In the distance, a coyote called. Closer, in the stable, one of the horses nickered softly. Inside the house, one of the children stirred and then settled back into sleep. "I want to have more children," Penny said suddenly. Zane looked at her in surprise and delight. "You do. James and Rose should have more siblings, and I want to fill this house with love and laughter. I want to prove that family can be wonderful, that children can be blessings rather than burdens." "Then we will have more children," Zane said, pulling her closer. "As many as you want." She turned in his arms and kissed him deeply, still amazed that she got to keep this man, this life, this happiness. 2 years later, twin boys arrived, creating happy chaos in the Yates household. They named them Matthew and Mark, and from the beginning, they were trouble in the best possible way. James, now 7, took his role as oldest sibling seriously, trying to help corral his energetic younger brothers. Rose, at 5, was already showing signs of having inherited her mother's head for business, organizing her brothers into elaborate games with strict rules. Penny sometimes found herself overwhelmed by the noise and mess of 4 children under 8, but it was a good overwhelm. The house was full of life. The trading post remained successful, though she had hired help now, unable to manage it alone with a full household. Zane's reputation as a horse trainer had spread beyond Bitter Springs, and people traveled from neighboring territories to work with him. They were prosperous, not wealthy but comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. In 1886, their youngest child arrived, another daughter they named Grace Ann. She was unexpected, born when Penny was 31 and had assumed her childbearing days were finished. But Grace was welcomed with as much joy as her siblings, completing their family in a way they hadn't known was missing. James was 12 now, already showing his father's way with horses. Rose was 10 and had started helping in the trading post, sharp with numbers and charming with customers. The twins were 8 and a constant source of entertainment and exhaustion. And Grace was the baby everyone doted on. One afternoon in late summer, a wagon rolled into Bitter Springs carrying a family that looked painfully familiar to Penny. A mother and father with hollow eyes and 3 daughters ranging in age from about 12 to 16. The father approached the trading post, clearly looking for something, and Penny knew with sick certainty what that something was. He was looking for a buyer, looking to sell one of his daughters. She watched him through the window, saw him approach several men in town, saw the conversations. Most of the men shook their heads and moved on. Bitter Springs had changed since 1873. It was more established now, with laws enforced more strictly. But there were still men who might be interested in such a transaction. Penny made a decision. She locked the trading post early and went to find the family. They had camped on the edge of town, their wagons sagging under the weight of their few possessions. The 3 girls sat together, their faces reflecting the same resignation Penny remembered from her own 15-year-old self. "Excuse me," Penny said, approaching the father. "My name is Penny Yates. I own the trading post in town." The man looked at her warily. "What do you want?" "I understand you are in difficult circumstances. I would like to offer your family work. My trading post needs help, and my husband's stable always needs hands for mucking stalls and general work. It is not much, but it includes meals and a place to stay in our barn until you can save enough for your own place." The man stared at her suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" "Because everyone deserves a chance," Penny said simply, but she looked at the oldest daughter as she said it, and the girl's eyes widened with sudden hope. "We do not need charity," the father said stiffly, but his voice lacked conviction. "It is not charity, it is work. Honest work for honest pay. But the offer is contingent on your entire family staying together. No marriages, no sales, no giving anyone away. Your daughters work for me and live with your family. That is the condition." The mother, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "We will take your offer." "Thank you." The father looked like he might argue, but the combined force of his wife's determination and his own desperation won out. He nodded grudgingly. That evening, Penny told Zane what she had done. He listened quietly, then smiled and pulled her into his arms. "You are an extraordinary woman, Penny Yates." "I just remember what it was like," she said quietly. "I remember having no choice. I wanted to give them a choice." The family, whose name was Harper, settled into work. The oldest daughter, Patricia, who was 16, worked in the trading post and proved to have a natural head for business. The middle daughter, Louise, helped Mrs. Harper with cooking for the growing workforce. The youngest, barely 13, helped with lighter tasks and attended the school Penny had helped establish years ago. Watching Patricia bloom with confidence as she earned her own money and had control over her own life, Penny felt a deep satisfaction. She was changing the story, one girl at a time. Years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary rhythms of life. James grew into a fine young man, taking over more of the horse training business from his father. Rose shocked everyone by announcing at 18 that she wanted to go to San Francisco to study business. Instead of trying to stop her, Penny and Zane supported her dream, understanding that giving their daughter choices was the greatest gift they could offer. The twins went into business together, opening a freight company that served the growing towns of Wyoming Territory. Grace, the baby, showed an interest in medicine, spending hours with Dr. Morrison when he made his rounds. By 1895, Penny and Zane were in their early 50s, watching their grown children make their own ways in the world. The trading post was now run by Patricia Harper, who had bought it from Penny 5 years earlier and was running it with impressive efficiency. Patricia had married a young teacher and had 2 children of her own, and she often thanked Penny for giving her family a chance when they had needed it most. Zane had officially retired from horse training, though he still kept a few horses that he worked with for pleasure. Their house, which had once rung with the chaos of 5 children, was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than a lonely one. One evening in late spring, Penny and Zane walked through the town that had been their home for over 20 years. Bitter Springs had grown considerably. There was now a proper main street with a bank, 2 hotels, 3 restaurants, a school, a church, and even a small opera house. The railroad had come through 10 years ago, connecting them to the larger world. They walked hand in hand, as they had for over 18 years of marriage, watching the town settle in for the evening. "You ever regret staying here?" Zane asked. "This is where you were brought as a girl, where you suffered." Penny considered the question seriously. "This is also where I survived, where I learned my own strength, where I met you, where we built our family. I have more good memories here than bad ones now. The bad memories do not control me anymore." "You turned pain into purpose," Zane said. "You took your suffering and used it to help others, to make sure other girls had chances you didn't have." "We did that together," she corrected. "Everything good in my life I built with you." They stopped in front of the house, their house, with its wide porch and curtained windows. Lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. "Do you remember what you said to me once?" Penny asked. "You said I was worth waiting for." "I remember. It was true then, and it is true now." "I am glad you waited," she said softly. "I am glad you gave me time to heal, to grow, to become someone who could receive love properly. If you had rushed me, if you had pushed, I would have married you out of gratitude or obligation. But you waited until I could choose you out of love. That made all the difference." Zane cupped her face in his weathered hands, looking at her with eyes that still held the same love they had 20 years ago. "You are the best choice I ever made. Waiting for you was easy because I always knew that you were my future. And you are mine," she said. "You showed me what love should be. Patient, kind, respectful. You let me heal at my own pace. You gave me choices. You loved me right." They kissed on their front porch as the stars began to appear. 2 people who had found each other in the harsh landscape of the frontier and built something beautiful together. Inside, they sat in their comfortable sitting room, Penny with her knitting and Zane with his current book. This was their routine now, peaceful evenings together after active days. They didn't need constant excitement. They had built a life that was satisfying in its ordinary beauty. "James sent a letter," Zane said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "He and Sarah are expecting their 3rd child in October." Penny smiled. "That will make 6 grandchildren for us. We are becoming quite the established family. Remember when you were afraid to have children?" Zane reminded her gently. "Afraid you would not know how to love them properly." "I remember. I was so scared I would repeat the mistakes of my parents. But you didn't. You gave our children something precious. You gave them unconditional love and the freedom to choose their own paths. James with his horses, Rose with her business in San Francisco, the twins with their freight company, and Grace pursuing medicine. You let them all find their own ways." "We let them find their own ways," Penny corrected again. "We parented them together, just as we built everything else together." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Zane rose to answer it and found Patricia Harper standing on the porch, holding a basket. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Yates. I am sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to bring these by." She held up the basket. "Fresh bread and preserves. A small thank you for everything you did for my family." "Patricia, you do not need to keep thanking us," Penny said, coming to the door. "That was years ago." "I know," Patricia said, but I tell my daughters about it, about how you gave us a choice when we had none, about how you proved that women can run businesses and make their own decisions. You changed the course of my entire life. My daughters are growing up knowing they have choices, because you showed me that possibilities existed." After Patricia left, Penny stood in the doorway, looking out at the town she had come to love despite its difficult beginning. "We did make a difference," she said wonderingly. "Not just with our own children, but with others too." "You made a difference," Zane said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You took your pain and transformed it into compassion. You could have become bitter and hard, but instead you became strong and kind. That is remarkable." They stood together in the doorway, watching the night settle over Bitter Springs. Somewhere in town, a baby cried. Dogs barked in the distance. A train whistle sounded, announcing the late evening arrival from Cheyenne. The town that had once been Penny's prison had become her home. The girl who had been given away at 15 had grown into a woman who knew her own worth. And the cowboy who had waited patiently until she was ready to be loved right had built a lifetime of happiness with her. "Come to bed," Zane said softly. "We have church in the morning, and you know Reverend Thomas goes long when he gets started on the Book of Psalms." Penny laughed and let him lead her inside. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving with the comfortable familiarity of two people who had shared a bed for nearly 2 decades. That night, as she lay in her husband's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, Penny thought about the journey that had brought her here. The fear and pain of her girlhood, the horror of being sold to Samuel Cross, the slow healing that had followed his death, and the patient love of the man who had seen her when she was invisible and had waited until she was ready to be truly seen. She thought about her children, each one a miracle she had never expected. She thought about the life she had built, the trading post that had been her salvation, the house that had become a home, the community where she belonged. She thought about all the ways life could break a person and all the ways love could put them back together. "Are you happy?" Zane murmured in the darkness, sensing that she was still awake. "So happy," she whispered. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." "Good," he said, tightening his arms around her. "You deserve every bit of happiness." She fell asleep feeling safe and loved, two things she had once thought impossible. The years continued their steady march. Zane and Penny grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming weathered with age. But their love only deepened, mellowing like good wine. They became the elder statesmen of Bitter Springs, the couple people pointed to as an example of what marriage should be. Young couples sought their advice. Struggling families found help at their door. They were known for their generosity, their wisdom, and their obvious affection for each other. In 1900, when Penny was 45 and Zane was 49, they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. All 5 of their children returned home for the occasion, bringing spouses and grandchildren. The house was full to bursting with 3 generations of family, with noise and laughter and love. Rose, now 32 and a successful businesswoman in San Francisco, stood to give a toast at the anniversary dinner. "To my parents," she said, raising her glass, "who taught me that love is patient, that strength comes from surviving hardship, and that the greatest gift parents can give their children is the freedom to choose their own paths. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, I owe to the foundation you gave me. You showed me what real love looks like, and I have tried to build that same love in my own marriage." James stood next. "To my father who taught me patience and kindness, to my mother who taught me strength and compassion. You loved each other well, and in doing so you taught us how to love others well." The twins spoke together, as they often did. To the best parents a couple of troublemakers could ask for, you never gave up on us, even when we probably deserved it. Finally, Grace, the youngest at 19 and now studying medicine in Cheyenne, raised her glass with tears in her eyes. To the parents who never made me feel like I had to fit into a certain mold, you let me dream big dreams and supported me every step of the way. I hope someday to love someone the way you two love each other. When the toasts were finished and the grandchildren had been put to bed in various corners of the house, Penny and Zane slipped outside to their porch. The night was clear, the stars brilliant against the black sky. 25 years, Penny said wonderingly. When I married Samuel, I could not imagine living 25 days, much less building a life that would last 25 years. But you did more than just build a life, Zane said. You healed. You thrived. You became the woman you were always meant to be. Because you let me, she said. Because you waited until I was ready. Because you loved me right. It was the easiest thing I ever did, he replied. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. They sat together in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their family sleeping inside. This was their legacy. Not just the businesses they had built or the money they had saved, but the love they had created and the family that had grown from that love. I wish I could go back and tell that scared 15-year-old girl what was waiting for her, Penny said softly. I would tell her to hold on, that the pain will not last forever, that healing is possible, that love can be beautiful when it is given freely rather than demanded. She would not have believed you, Zane said gently. She was too hurt, too broken. She had to walk that path herself, had to survive and heal in her own time. You are right, Penny agreed. But I am glad I walked that path. As terrible as it was, it made me who I am, and I like who I am now. I love who you are, Zane corrected. I have always loved who you are, from the first moment I saw you. I saw past the fear and pain to the strength underneath. I knew you were remarkable. I just had to wait for you to realize it too. Penny stood and pulled her husband to his feet. Dance with me. There is no music. We will make our own music. They danced on the porch under the stars, moving slowly to a rhythm only they could hear. Inside, if any of their children had looked out the window, they would have seen their parents dancing together, still in love after 25 years, still choosing each other every day. The years moved on, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. In 1903, James and Sarah lost a baby, born too early to survive. Penny held her son while he wept, sharing his grief while also marveling at his capacity to love, even in loss. She had raised him right. In 1905, one of the twins, Matthew, was injured in a freight accident. He recovered, but it took months, and the whole family rallied around him, showing up in shifts to help his wife and children while he healed. Through it all, Penny and Zane remained the steady center, the foundation upon which the family built their lives. In 1907, Zane suffered a heart episode that frightened everyone. Dr. Morrison, now elderly himself, said it was a warning that Zane needed to slow down even more. Penny refused to leave his side during his recovery, sitting by his bed day and night, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together. You are not allowed to leave me, she said fiercely. We made a promise to grow old together, and I intend to hold you to it. He squeezed her hand weakly. I am not going anywhere. I waited too long to find you to give you up now. He recovered, though he moved more slowly afterward. They both did. Age was catching up with them as it catches everyone eventually, but age brought its own gifts. Grandchildren who climbed into their laps to hear stories. Great-grandchildren who looked at them with wonder, unable to imagine their grandparents had ever been young. Respect from the community they had served for so long. The peace that comes from a life well lived. On a warm evening in June of 1910, Penny and Zane sat on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. She was 63 now, and he was 67. Their children were all established in their own lives. Their grandchildren were growing up strong and loved. Their great-grandchildren were just beginning to arrive. "You have any regrets?" Penny asked, a question she had asked before but felt compelled to ask again. Zane thought carefully before answering. "I regret that I could not save you from that first marriage. I regret that you had to suffer at all, but I do not regret waiting for you. I do not regret any of the life we built together. Every moment with you has been a gift, even the hard moments, especially the hard moments," he said. "They taught us to appreciate the good ones. They made us stronger. They showed us what we were capable of surviving together." Penny leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Zane Yates. I have loved you for more than 30 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Penny Yates. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. The same mountains Penny had looked at when she first arrived in Bitter Springs, frightened and alone. The same mountains that had witnessed her transformation from victim to survivor to woman fully alive. The town around them had changed dramatically since 1873. Bitter Springs was now an established town with modern conveniences. Electricity had recently been installed on Main Street. Automobiles were beginning to appear alongside horses and wagons. The world was modernizing rapidly, but some things remained constant: love, family, the importance of choosing kindness over cruelty, the power of patience, the beauty of giving people time to heal. These were the lessons Penny and Zane had learned and taught, and these lessons would live on through their children and grandchildren long after they were gone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Penny thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about the cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had waited patiently until she was ready to be loved right, who had built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Zane asked. "For everything. For waiting. For loving me. For giving me time. For building this beautiful life with me. For every single day of the last 32 years. The pleasure has been entirely mine," he said, kissing the top of her head. They stayed on the porch until the stars were bright overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had created something beautiful from pain. They had proven that love, real love, was worth waiting for. That patience and respect could heal the deepest wounds. That choosing each other, day after day, year after year, was the greatest adventure of all. Eventually, they rose and went inside, climbing the stairs slowly, their steps synchronized after decades of walking side by side. They prepared for bed with the easy routine of long marriage, and when they finally lay down, Penny curled into Zane's side as she had done for more than 30 years. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night," she replied. And in the morning, they would wake up and choose each other again, just as they had done every day since that November morning in 1877, when Penny had said yes to the man who had waited until she was ready. This was their story. A story of survival and healing, of patience and love, of a girl who was given away but who found her own worth, and a cowboy who understood that real love means giving someone time to heal. It was a story that would be told for generations in their family, a reminder that even the darkest beginnings can lead to beautiful endings if you are brave enough to hold on and patient enough to wait for the right kind of love. As Penny drifted off to sleep that night, safe in her husband's arms, in the house they had built, in the town that had become her home, surrounded by the love of family and community, She knew with absolute certainty that she had been blessed beyond measure. She had been given away at 15 to a man who saw her as property. But she had survived. She had endured. She had grown strong. And then, when she was finally ready, a cowboy had loved her right, with patience and respect and unwavering devotion, and that had made all the difference.